Thank you. During the day, we've had many technical things about Sharia, its effect overseas, its effect in the nations where it has been, and where it is moving into, including Europe. Tonight, I'm going to get just a little bit personal. As the chairman of the Religious Freedom Coalition, I have been a part of numerous fact-finding missions all over the world. Some of these have been with congressional staff, others with former congressmen and governors, to witness religious persecution firsthand. As part of my duties, I once had dinner with President Omar Hassan Ahmad al-Bashir. This is the mass murderer of Christians in the Sudan. As I left his home on an army base in the Sudan, I sensed that he would prefer to kill me later rather than sooner. Yesterday, his jets bombed a Christian refugee camp in South Sudan. I have wept at the burned-out churches and desecrated Christian cemeteries in the Kosovo. Some churches built 1,000 years ago have been destroyed within the last 10 years. I have talked in secret with the few remaining Jews in Morocco and walked in the giant cathedrals of Constantinople, which have been desecrated and are now used as mosques. Part of my work takes me frequently to Samaria, which is referred to by the Western press as the West Bank. I have watched in amazement the change there over the past 30 years. In the 1980s, a Muslim woman could walk down the street of Bethlehem alone, wearing Western clothes and even makeup, because of the moderating influence of the Christian population, which at the time was over 85%. After the United States forced Israel to relinquish Bethlehem, the city limits were changed to bring the Christian population down to less than 50%. The Saudi Investment Bank loaned 200% of the value of any home to a Muslim if he bought a Christian house, bringing the population even lower. Christian businessmen were threatened, forced to quit, forced to sell their businesses, even those in Nativity Square. Last year, armed Palestinian guards, Muslims, blocked me from taking a group into the grotto of the Church of the Nativity, the traditional birthplace of Christ, because a group of Muslim women were holding a meeting there. The Christian population of Bethlehem is now less than 20%, and all of the Christians that could afford to flee the West Bethlehem are gone. Most of them have immigrated to Chile and Argentina. Chile alone has over 500,000 Christian Palestinians who have fled from Islamic oppression or who are descendants of those that fled. Why Chile? Because Chile will take them. Meanwhile, Nashville is a gateway for Islamic immigration sponsored by our federal government. Our embassies around the world do their best to block Christian Arabs from coming here, particularly Iraqi Christians. How should I know? How could I know? Because former governor of South Carolina, David Beasley, and I personally accumulated the evidence and talked to the embassies, particularly those in the Middle East. Today, Christian women who walk down the street in Bethlehem are cursed and spit on by Muslim men. Many Christian girls are the victims of rape because they are viewed as less than human. Complicit in this is the radically left-wing Anglican church that views its mission in the West Bank as assisting the Palestinians in taking back their land from the Jews. There are some elected Christian officials left in the Palestinian territories, virtually all of whom are associated with the Sabeel Ecumenical Liberation Center. Need I say more? But don't worry, it can't happen here. London, referred to by many as Londonistan, is the western capital of radical Islam. There are 70 no-go areas in London where signs are posted that say Sharia law enforced. At this conference, British barrister Paul Diamond referred to a case in one township where a church hundreds of years old was declared a public nuisance and closed as soon as Muslims gained control of the town council. In Paris, every Friday, in the Muslim-controlled sections of the city, the streets are shut down for blocks by Muslim worshippers holding their prayers in the streets. There is no lack of space. That is not the reason. It is to show the power of the population to enforce Sharia law. Just 2 weeks ago, a satirical magazine in France was firebombed because it referred to Muhammad and had a comic reference to Sharia law. French Jews faced almost intolerable insults and persecutions from Muslims that the traditionally anti-Semitic French people have joined in on. Thousands of Jews a year are fleeing to Israel and the United States. But don't worry, it can't happen here. The Western campaign to remove secular dictators from the Middle East has a payoff. That payoff is even more persecution of Christians and Jews. Back when President Jimmy Carter forced out the Shah of Iran, there was a large Jewish and Christian population there. During the last year or so, the few remaining Jews in Iran were secretly shepherded and spirited out. And daily we hear of arrests of pastors and torture of pastors in Iran. Churches in Iran go back to the time of Peter and Paul. Soon there will be none. A few years later, President Bill Clinton bombed Christian Serbia into the Dark Ages to force it to allow Kosovo, the area where Christianity began in the Slavic world, to become the first Islamic nation in Europe. Terrorist training camps now abound there, and recently there was an attack on our Air Force unit in Germany that was led by those from Kosovo. The last Christian church in Afghanistan was torn down by the government we fund there and support just last year. Our military personnel in Afghanistan have been instructed that they are not to urinate in the direction of Mecca. They may also, when they sleep, their boots may not point toward Mecca. This is in accordance with Sharia law. Off base, our female military personnel wear the hijab in compliance with Sharia law. There were more than 1 million Christians in Iraq under the secular dictatorship of Saddam Hussein. President George W. Bush unfortunately made no provision for them in the chaotic aftermath of the invasion. Perhaps 200,000 of those remain, maybe more, it's hard to tell. The rest have fled, many to Syria, where we are now championing the overthrow of that secular dictatorship. Forced out of their jobs and homes. Under the direction of the United States of America, the new Constitution of Iraq is Sharia compliant. The Constitution says that no law may be passed in contradiction to the Quran. There is we have an office, my organization, the Religious Freedom Coalition, works on relief efforts with Iraqi Christian refugees. We have an office in a Middle Eastern city from which that aid is administered. There's press in this room, and as a result, I cannot mention the location specifically of our facilities, because if they're reported on, they'll be attacked and destroyed, and lives could be lost. We have internet sites about what we do there. They are password protected so that our donors only can see the progress on facilities that are under repair. If the press in this room were to report on the URLs of the internet sites and have the access codes made public, it could lead to the loss of life. I have personally met with Iraqi families whose young daughters have been kidnapped and raped. Sometimes young Christian girls are forced into Muslim marriages in Iraq. One family I met refused to hand over their 15-year-old daughter. A few days later, she was kidnapped. Her nude body was dumped in the town square. The one that just astounds me that I can never ever wipe from my mind is a family that I wept with and prayed with. The next door neighbor demanded their 15-year-old daughter. They refused. Their 3-year-old son went missing the next day. He was taken, put live into an oven, cooked, and returned to them with an apple in his mouth and a note that said, "Christians must obey." Most Islamic nations, by the way, practice polygamy. Not all, but most. There are some that have a secular influence where that doesn't happen. In nations such as Saudi Arabia, 10% of the men are married to 40% of the women. The resulting shortage of women is a driving force behind jihad, a driving force behind the kidnapping of Christian and Buddhist and other women. It is the driving force behind seeking 72 virgins in heaven through martyrdom. But none of this can happen here. In the moderate nation of Indonesia a few years ago, several Christian girls were beheaded on the way to school because they refused the advances of Muslim men. Last week, more than 200 Christians were murdered in Nigeria by the Islamic Boko Haram, which is trying to force Sharia law in all of Nigeria. The nation is still 50% Christian. Many Christian villages in Nigeria have been attacked over the past few years. Men come in the middle of the night and hack entire families to death with machetes. In the past few years, hundreds of Hindus have died in terror attacks in India. This year, hundreds of Buddhists and Christians have been murdered by those seeking Sharia law in Thailand. Those seeking Sharia in the Philippines killed Christian agricultural workers, a truckload of them, just last week. And this year, 2 Christian churches in the Philippines have been bombed. In Pakistan, the only Christian member of the government was murdered. In that nation, several Christians rot in jail for years, having been accused of blasphemy but never tried. Oh, but don't worry, Sharia can't happen here. Just ask the establishment. This conference was kicked out of the Hutton Hotel in this city because the owners came to the conclusion that we, the people in this room, would violate Sharia law. Make no mistake about that. The owners came to that conclusion. They claimed that their employees, their staff, their customers would come under danger, that we would incite violence. It was the second hotel in 2 weeks that had torn up and thrown out a contract with a conference on Sharia. The Cartoon Network canceled or altered shows to remove any critical reference to Islam. Tom Clancy's best-selling novel, The Sum of All Fears, featured Muslim terrorists, but by the time a movie was made, guess who the terrorists were? Germans. How many German terrorists do you know? Actually, I take that back. There are plenty of German terrorists. They all worship in mosques. In Washington State, a cartoonist has had to change their name and go into hiding because they promoted a Draw Muhammad Day. The man who operates the internet site, thereligionofpeace.com, has changed his name and is in hiding. The site is under constant attack. Did you notice the security when you came into this conference? Many of those participating, including myself, have received credible death threats. There are uniformed and plainclothes armed men in this building. They're here right now to protect the lives of the participants, including you, and including the members of the press, some of whom are only here to be critical of those assembled. Indeed, one of the reasons given by the Hutton Hotel, as I said, is that they feared harm to their staff and guests. From whom? From those in this room? No, but from those who want to enforce a code of Sharia, a code that says that no one may be critical of Islam or Sharia or any of a Muslim's actions. My friends, it is happening here. Sharia law is not enforced by the law of the land. It is enforced from the mosque through threats of violence. Honor killings are now played down by the press in our nation. When the owner of an Islamic TV cable company 2 years ago cut off his wife's head when she was seeking a separation, the story was virtually non-existent. And when American movies are translated into Arabic for that market, they are made Sharia compliant, and oftentimes, anti-Christian sentiment is added to movies when they're translated into Arabic. The final report on the jihad attack by Major Nadal Hassoun at Fort Hood, which killed 14, never mentioned his Islamic fundamentalism. Indeed, Islam, terror, and jihad were never even mentioned in the final report. Despite his screams of Allah Akbar during the attack, MSNBC reported that Hassan killed these innocent people, including one unborn baby, because of the stress related to a deployment that had not even happened. A few days ago was the second anniversary of the attack on Fort Hood. Did you see much reporting on that? A second Muslim soldier, by the way, is under arrest down there with bomb-making materials. He was planning a second attack. The censorship at Ground Zero is intolerable. Unlike with the attack on Pearl Harbor, we are told the 9/11 jihad attack is only about the dead, not about the attackers. We honor the dead each year, but with no religious service at the site. No one mentions Islam, no one mentions jihad, and those that officiate the events for 9/11, such as Mayor Michael Bloomberg, promote the construction of the Ground Zero Mosque. What is the result of this self-enforced compliance to Sharia law in the United States? Even more Sharia law. More in the future. When crosses must be removed from Catholic universities, there's a lawsuit on that. It may offend a Muslim student. When pastors are arrested for being critical of Islam, there is a London stand in the UK. There's just sort of no doubt about that. We do not need a Nashville stand in the United States of America. Not only can it happen here, it is happening here. We are at the stage of self-imposed Sharia law under the threat of violence. Those who have been at this conference have much information to return home with, much to use to educate others. There is one major lesson that everyone needs to leave this place with. We cannot be silenced. Silence about Sharia is surrender to Sharia. I urge everyone leaving this place not only to remember what they've heard, to share what they have heard, and to not be silent about what you know. Please take this message everywhere you go. Thank you, and God bless you all.